In the earliest days of existence, there was only vast and shapeless emptiness. This silent gulf was called chaos, and it stretched outward in every direction, without boundary or form. Ancient poets and storytellers imagined it as a swirling darkness that contained every possibility, yet had brought forth no living presence. It is said that all things, gods, titans, and mortals, would owe their beginnings to this first condition of utter nothingness. Out of this silence arose a profound shift that no one can fully explain. Some believed that chaos itself stirred, much like a ripple crossing a still pond. From that subtle tremor, several primeval beings came into being, each with a nature both majestic and strange. Their names were murmured by bards who tried to capture the unimaginable wonder of that first awakening, even as they knew words could only hint at its real power. It was in this moment that Gaia, the earth, emerged with an awe-inspiring calm. Some said she simply opened her eyes into being. Others thought she was the ground made conscious. Gaia was timeless and sturdy, and wherever she touched, the promise of life would one day spring up. She was not alone for long, for soon Eros, the essence of desire and love, became real as well, an invisible force that kindled attraction and passion in all that followed. Soon after, shapeless shadows gathered into tangible presences. Nyx, who embodied the very idea of night, and Erebus, who represented the density of darkness. From Nyx came a succession of children that poets would remember for centuries. Hemera, the bright day, whose presence chased away the gloom, and Ether, the upper air that seemed purer than mortal breath. Each new being was powerful in its own right, yet all traced their lineage back to that first mysterious chaos. Gaia felt a kind of solitude under the boundless expanse, so she brought forth Uranus, the sky. Their relationship was both intimate and immense, with Uranus stretching above and Gaia anchoring below. Together, they formed a primordial union of earth and sky that would give birth to a line of incredible offspring. Thus the limitless heavens arched over the wide, fertile plain of existence, creating a stage for wonders yet to come. In their union, Gaia and Uranus produced children of colossal might and puzzling shapes. Among them were the 12 Titans, each embodying a vast aspect of nature or being. Like the shining river Titan Oceanus, whose currents were said to circle the world, or Hyperion, who shone with the radiance of the sun. There were also children whose forms defied mortal imagination. The one-eyed Cyclopes, famed for their singular glare, and the 100-handed giants, monstrous and powerful with limbs beyond counting. Uranus, however, looked upon some of his children with dread or disgust, especially those whose forms he found unsettling. Fearing their power, he forced them deep into the earth, trapping them within Gaia's very womb. Their cries of pain and anger rumbled through her soil, sparking fury in Gaia's maternal heart. She endured it for as long as she could, but eventually she could no longer stand to see them held prisoner. Driven by her rage and sorrow, Gaia forged a sickle out of an unbreakable metal. She whispered her plan to her brood, yet only Cronus, the youngest Titan, answered her plea. He took the sickle in hand and bided his time, waiting for Uranus to come near. One fateful moment, Cronus swung the blade, wounding Uranus and separating him from Gaia forever. In that swift act of violence, the old order shattered, and a new chapter began. The blood from Uranus spilled upon the waters of the sea, mixing with the foam in a curious and potent way. From that froth, so legends insist, arose the figure of Aphrodite, beauty and love given living form. Although this event occurred at the dawn of time, mortals would later worship her in temples strewn with roses and speak her name with reverence. Thus even tragedy paved the way for fresh vitality among the divine. Cronus had assumed his father's throne, but in many ways his reign echoed the cruelty that preceded him. A prophecy haunted him, whispering that one of his children would topple his power as well. He resolved to swallow each newborn moments after they emerged into the world, an act that chilled the hearts of gods and mortals who would later hear the tale. His sister consort, Rhea, grew desperate, unwilling to see her children devoured. In secrecy, Rhea devised a plan. When the time came for her youngest child, Zeus, to be born, she hid him away and instead handed Cronus a stone dressed in swaddling clothes. Cronus, never suspecting the ruse, gulped it down in the same ruthless manner as before. Far away, on the island of Crete, Zeus was nurtured by the tender care of Gaia and other helpers. Far from Cronus's searching eye, Zeus grew swiftly, his divine vigor impossible to contain. When he achieved the full measure of his strength, he tricked Cronus into vomiting up his siblings. With them by his side, he challenged the old order. The clash that followed was so immense that the cosmos itself trembled. Thunderbolts soared, oceans heaved, and the earth moaned as titans battled gods in a struggle that felt destined to remake reality. Years of warfare ended with the titans' defeat, and Zeus cast them into the depths of Tartarus, cementing his new authority. Those who survived were either exiled or pledged loyalty to the new regime. The relentless Titan Atlas was punished to forever bear the sky's weight, an eternal testament to the gravity of defying the new pantheon. Earth and sky fell silent as the Olympians established their rule. In the wake of Cronus's downfall, an uneasy calm settled across creation. Yet though a new hierarchy had arisen, none could deny the lingering echoes of chaos, that first emptiness from which everything was born. In some sense, chaos was still present in every corner of existence, reminding the gods that all form and order could someday unravel back into darkness. A fresh cosmos had taken shape under the watch of Zeus and his siblings, but fate would continue to weave its threads. These earliest struggles had revealed that even divine parents could fear their children, that violence could spawn unexpected beauty, and that cunning and courage could overthrow an entire age. The events sparked by Gaia's love and Uranus's cruelty were only the beginning of an epic tapestry. The new gods, glorious though they were, remained shaped by their origins in chaos. Some harbored ambitions, others felt love or jealousy, and all seemed to hold a share of the cosmos' untamed energy. As their dramas continued, mortals would one day build temples, sing hymns, and recount these stories around flickering fires, never quite forgetting the quiet, endless void that was there at the start. The war against Cronus had ended, but the world still trembled with the aftershocks of that cataclysm. Zeus emerged victorious, youthful and burning with new power. His eyes flashed like lightning, and in many ways, he seemed as vast and unstoppable as the sky itself. Not all who followed him, however, felt only gratitude for his triumph. Some feared that this new order, like the last, might succumb to jealousy and violence if left unchecked. Long before the final blow was struck, Zeus had made secret alliances. Imprisoned deep within the earth were beings of tremendous might, the hundred-handed giants and the Cyclopes. Cronus, much like his father before him, had feared their strength and banished them to hidden depths, away from the light. Zeus traveled to their prison, overcame the guards loyal to the Titans, and freed these astonishing creatures. In his first major act as a liberator, he proved he meant to govern differently from Cronus. The Cyclopes, in gratitude for their freedom, forged 3 wondrous gifts. For Zeus, they fashioned a thunderbolt, crackling with the raw fury of storms. For Poseidon, they created a trident, each prong able to stir earthquakes and whirlpools. For Hades, they crafted a helmet so shadowy and subtle it rendered its wearer invisible. Though sculpted from unearthly materials, each of these items seemed alive, humming with a primal magic that no mortal craft could ever rival. With these divine weapons, the Olympians pressed their advantage in the final battles of the Titanomachy. Poseidon used his trident to churn the seas into towering waves that battered Titan strongholds. Zeus, standing on mountain summits, unleashed lightning that seared the skies and split open the earth. Hades lurked in the gloom, descending on his foes unseen, turning many battles with his stealth. Their power, together, could not be equaled by any single Titan, and one by one, Cronus's allies fell. In that last great clash, the very land seemed to scream. Mountains shook, rivers reversed their flow, and the heavens filled with streaks of scorching light. Titans roared, too proud to surrender, but the younger gods had a fervor and unity their foes lacked. Cronos stretched each moment into what felt like centuries of suffering, until with a final thunderous crash, the Titan forces collapsed. Their rebellious howls faded into echoes under the looming strength of the Olympians. When the dust settled, Cronus and most of his siblings were led away in chains. Zeus consigned them to the black pit of Tartarus, a chasm even deeper than the mortal realm of Hades's kingdom. Some said the walls of Tartarus were forged of unbreakable gloom, so that no prisoner could climb free. From then on, echoes of Titan laments rose ceaselessly from those fathomless depths, but the world above soared into a new age. Atlas, a commander among the Titans and famed for his unyielding spirit, faced a special fate. Zeus decreed that Atlas must bear the dome of the sky on his shoulders forever. Upon hearing this verdict, some among the Titans averted their eyes, pitying him, for this punishment was relentless. The heavy mass of the heavens pressed down on Atlas's broad back, ensuring he could never roam freely again. Though Poseidon and Hades had contributed mightily, Zeus held the greatest sway among the victors. To quiet unrest and ensure balance, the three brothers chose to divide the realms by chance. Zeus took dominion of the endless sky, Poseidon claimed the turbulent seas, and Hades accepted the shadowy underworld. Each, in theory, held equal authority over his domain, yet everyone knew that Zeus's word still carried a special weight. It was then that the newly crowned lords of creation gazed upon the reshaped landscape. Forests sprouted anew on charred land, oceans calmed after the storms, and the vault of heaven radiated with a fresh brilliance. As they surveyed the wide horizon, the gods considered what sort of order they would create in this realm. Some predicted an era of peace, others anticipated new conflicts. The seeds of hope and strife both lay ready to take root. In the midst of these transformations, human life was only just beginning to stir. Some accounts say men and women drew near to the gods with reverence, building altars and offering prayers. The earliest mortals watched the sky nervously, wary of further battles among immortal beings. With Cronus fallen, men hoped to be free from the terrors inflicted by passing storms of war, yet they remained uncertain how the Olympians might choose to treat them. Zeus in particular garnered awe and trepidation. His new throne sat atop Mount Olympus, a peak whose summit pierced the clouds. Some nights, shepherds standing in distant valleys saw jagged flashes across the summit, proof that the thunderbolt never wandered far from Zeus's grasp. Already, stories began spreading of how he commanded storms and dealt swift justice. The name of the Olympian king became a hushed, powerful word on mortal tongues. Poseidon, though less often glimpsed by land dwellers, was equally formidable. He dwelled in a palace beneath the waves, luminous and mysterious. When fishermen dared speak his name, it was with careful courtesy, for they knew how unpredictably he could send raging squalls to punish disrespect. Even so, many prayed for his favor to ensure calm seas and bountiful fishing. Far below them, the exiled Titans simmered in their prison. Hades, the quietest of the brothers, gathered the dead into his somber realm. He wore his helm of invisibility as he walked through mortal funerals unseen. More solemn than cruel, he oversaw the flow of souls from the surface world into the silence below. Though he seldom involved himself in mortal affairs, rumors of his dread power spread widely. Dying men called out to him, uncertain whether he would prove compassionate or cold. Despite these royal divisions, some elder forces still roamed. Gaia, the earth, never surrendered her ancient authority, watching her grandchildren rule from Olympus with a certain detachment. She could be both nurturing and fearsome, and she remembered well the cruelty inflicted on her hidden children in previous ages. Occasionally, she stirred deep beneath the soil, reminding everyone that the most ancient power slumbered in the bedrock of existence itself. Yet the cycle of conflict seemed broken, at least for a time. The sky stood united with the seas and the underworld under the new pantheon's rule. Though tensions would one day boil again, for now, the Olympians reveled in victory, forging new alliances and shaping the world in their image. In mountaintop feasts, they drank nectar, tasted ambrosia, and recounted their glories. Stories of the Titanomachy became legends, repeated by nymphs in forest glades and recounted by bards in mortal courts. The immortals who had witnessed these events directly understood them as the forging of a new cosmic order, hammered out on the anvil of war. For mortals, they were cautionary tales, teaching that not even the gods were immune to struggle, nor was any throne guaranteed to last eternally. In this renewed world, gods and mortals would forever dance between devotion and rivalry, forging the bonds of myth yet unwritten. Prometheus was born into the line of Titans but chose not to follow his kin during the great war that ended with Cronus's downfall. Instead, he aligned himself with Zeus and the Olympians, quietly observing as they forged a new order. Yet his keen eyes saw that, despite the gods' might, the mortal creatures now roaming the earth were left in darkness, struggling to survive with nothing but their frail bodies. In the mind of Prometheus, an unspoken obligation formed, urging him to lend humans some measure of advantage. He was no ordinary Titan. His reputation was for cunning and foresight. Legends said that he shaped the first mortal men from lumps of clay, sculpting their features with a craftsmanship that rivaled the finest arts of Olympus. He wanted his creations to possess more than mere life. He dreamed that they might learn, build, and even wonder about the cosmos. Yet they had no spark to lift them out of the obscurity in which they lived. It troubled him to see them huddled in caves, fearful of night's chill and helpless in the face of beasts. When Zeus demanded that mankind regularly sacrifice to the gods, Prometheus saw an opportunity. Wanting to ensure humans could survive while still offering tribute, he slaughtered a bull and divided its parts into two bundles. One was savory meat wrapped in the animal's unappealing stomach. The other was gleaming bones concealed beneath a tantalizing layer of fat. Prometheus presented both bundles to Zeus, inviting him to choose which portion should be offered to the gods. Zeus selected the deceptive pile of fat, later discovering he had been tricked into claiming nothing but bones. Infuriated, Zeus vowed to punish humans for Prometheus's cunning. He decreed they should have no fire to cook their food or warm their homes, leaving them in a state of ceaseless disadvantage. Prometheus, however, refused to let them languish in cold and darkness. With daring resolve, he ascended Mount Olympus, approached the sacred hearth of the gods, and stole a flickering ember. Some say he carried it in a hollow fennel stalk, shielding the spark until he reached the mortal world, where a blazing flame was kindled for the first time among humankind. Zeus's rage at this bold theft surpassed even his fury at the sacrifice trick. Mankind, now in possession of fire, flourished more quickly. They forged tools and built stronger shelters, dancing around bonfires that reached heavenward. For all their new vigor, mortals had no inkling of the storm of wrath gathering above them. Zeus decided Prometheus must suffer a punishment so severe that it would echo through the ages as a warning against any who might next challenge divine authority. The sentence was executed in a bleak region of the world where jagged cliffs plunged into a desolate valley. There, Prometheus was chained to a lonely mountainside. His bond was unbreakable, forged by Hephaestus himself under Zeus's command. Day after day, a monstrous eagle circled overhead, its cries filling the wind before it descended to tear out and devour the Titan's liver. Come nightfall, his immortal body regenerated the damage, ensuring that by dawn, his torment would begin afresh. He endured this agony with stoic pride, some would say, for he never renounced his love for mankind or regretted the stolen ember that saved them from perpetual darkness. Yet he watched the passing of countless years, hoping that one day a hero or a twist of fate might free him from this cruel cycle. His faith in humankind perhaps grew stronger in that time of suffering, a reminder that even the gods could not wholly stamp out compassion and vision. Zeus, meanwhile, was not content with simply torturing Prometheus. His gaze turned again to mortals, who had escaped the worst consequences of offending him. He decided he would give them a gift that appeared wondrous but secretly carried doom. To ensure his plan worked to perfection, he enlisted the talents of the gods, each adding something unique to this new creation. Hephaestus shaped a maiden from the finest clay, breathing into her form a delicate grace. Aphrodite endowed her with irresistible beauty and charm that sparkled in her eyes. Athena bestowed practical skills, from weaving elaborate fabrics to the gentle handling of domestic tasks. Hermes, quick-witted, gave her the art of speech and cunning. Zeus named her Pandora, which meant all-gifted, for each Olympian had contributed something to her making. When Pandora was presented to the world, all were amazed by her allure. Yet Zeus gave her one final offering, a sealed jar which some later poets called a box. He forbade her from opening it, knowing full well that her curiosity would eventually overwhelm any caution. If the fire stolen by Prometheus had helped humankind flourish, Zeus believed Pandora's secret container would plunge them into renewed distress. Pandora was soon taken as a wife by Epimetheus, the brother of Prometheus. Despite warnings from Prometheus to be wary of any gifts from Zeus, Epimetheus was enchanted by Pandora's grace and welcomed her into his home. For a time, it seemed mortals might enjoy the company of this beguiling new woman without any dire price. Yet the glimmer of wonder in Pandora's eyes grew sharper each day, drawn obsessively to the jar left in her keeping. No matter how often she reminded herself of Zeus's forbidding words, Pandora found it impossible to quell her curiosity. She wondered why the gods would create such an extraordinary vessel yet demand it remain forever sealed. At last, her resolve collapsed. She approached the jar, lifted the lid a mere fraction, and in that moment, every concealed misery, envy, disease, discord, greed, rushed out, fleeing into the open world like dark specters freed from a vault. As she slammed the lid shut in horror, Pandora realized she had trapped just one small entity inside. It fluttered and tapped against the sealed surface, a fragile essence known as hope. Though all manner of suffering had spilled forth, mortals were not wholly abandoned. They still retained this singular consolation, tiny yet powerful, whispering that not all was lost even when calamity befell them. Chaos crept anew into human lives as sickness and strife multiplied, yet they braced themselves with that minuscule, comforting force. Pandora wept at the ruin unleashed by her deed, while Epimetheus tried and failed to ease her guilt. Across the land, mortals questioned the gods, cursing their cruelty, yet discovering that with the spark of fire and the fragile presence of hope, they were not entirely helpless. In Olympus, Zeus gazed at this unfolding drama with cold satisfaction. His punishments had made it clear that mortals stood at the mercy of the divine. Still, the gods watched with a certain fascination as men and women, hounded by sorrow, embraced hope and used fire to reshape their lives. If Zeus's vengeance was intended to wipe out mortal aspirations, the result was strangely the opposite. Prometheus remained on his cliff, his agonies renewed daily. On occasion, the eagle's cries mingled with the distant sound of mortal prayers and weeping. Though few could hear him, he held on to his unwavering belief in mankind's potential. Far below, in villages trembling with fear, humans stoked their flames, built new defenses, and clung to the sustaining promise that all would not be darkness forever. The saga of Prometheus and Pandora forever exemplified the dangerous intersection of mortal ingenuity and godly wrath. Fire had illuminated civilization, but the ills of Pandora's jar forever lurked in the shadows, gnawing at mortal hearts. And yet, because hope lingered at the bottom of that container, the mortal race endured, forging myths, forging tools, and forging a future that not even the gods could entirely predict. Zeus's throne rose high on Mount Olympus, a gleaming symbol of the new order, but his heart was far from tranquil. Restless power coursed through him, and though he ruled the sky and commanded the thunder, he was often swayed by impulses and desires. Many whispered that his gaze could fall on any woman, mortal or divine, and ignite an uncontrollable passion, stirring love or havoc in equal measure. Hera, his wife and queen among the Olympians, was both regal and formidable. She oversaw marriage and childbirth, yet her jealousy burned like molten gold. Again and again, she found evidence of her husband's wandering affections and unleashed her wrath, whether upon Zeus's paramours or the children that sprang from those unions. Some murmured sympathy for Hera, while others dreaded her unrelenting fury. In one infamous tale, Zeus noticed Io, a priestess in Hera's own temple. She radiated a gentle beauty, the kind that awakened even the gods' curiosity. Hoping to conceal his pursuit, Zeus cloaked the land in a pale mist and approached Io in secrecy. But Hera, ever watchful, sensed deception. Swiftly, she ripped through the fog with her divine powers, forcing Zeus to hide Io by transforming her into a gleaming white heifer. Hera demanded the strange cow for herself and set the giant Argus, whose body was covered in 100 ever-watching eyes, to guard Io. Argus took his role in earnest. Even while half his eyes slept, the rest remained wide open. Finally, Zeus sent Hermes on a covert mission to end Io's captivity. With enchanting music and soft words, Hermes lulled Argus into slumber, and the giant's many eyes shut all at once. Seizing the moment, Hermes slew him, freeing Io from confinement. Yet Hera's revenge would not be thwarted so easily. She sent a gadfly to torment Io, who found herself wandering far from her homeland, driven nearly mad by its relentless stings. Wherever Io roamed, she was shunned. At times she saw her reflection in lakes or puddles, horrified by the bovine form in which she remained trapped. Still, Zeus offered her small mercies along the way, shielding her when he could until her journey led to distant Egypt, where her transformation was finally undone. Fiercely protective of her stature, Hera never let her anger cool. She was known to shift her vengeance unexpectedly, punishing not just Io but any who assisted Zeus's indiscretions. The other Olympians learned caution, careful not to stir Hera's bitterness unnecessarily, for they knew even her silent resentments could gather force over time. Zeus himself was never short of women catching his interest. Another time he wooed Leto, granddaughter of the Titans. From their union would come two potent deities, Apollo and Artemis. But Leto's pregnancy drew Hera's enmity. Wherever Leto tried to rest, Hera's spiteful influence barred her from shelter. Finally, on the barren Isle of Delos, Leto found refuge. Upon that rocky ground she bore her twins, despite Hera's attempts to keep Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, away and prolong Leto's misery. These children of Leto grew into magnificent Olympians. Apollo shone with the artistry of music and the clarity of prophecy, while Artemis roamed the wild forests, a guardian of animals and fierce protector of her own chastity. Some stories claimed that every new hymn or new hunt they led was a subtle reply to the torments their mother once suffered. Though Hera's wrath had almost ruined Leto, the result was two powerful gods whose brilliance would echo through every corner of the Greek world. Nor was Hera the only jealous Olympian. Poseidon, ruler of the seas, harbored his own slights and ambitions. Long ago, he and Apollo had collaborated to build the indestructible walls of Troy for King Laomedon, expecting lavish payment. When it never came, Poseidon bided his time, waiting for an opportunity to turn his mastery of waves against those who had shown him disrespect. At sea, he often quarreled with Athena for mortals' devotion, for each wanted to be the patron of shining cities. One mortal who felt Poseidon's dual nature was King Minos of Crete. The sea god had sent him a majestic white bull, with the expectation Minos would sacrifice it back to Poseidon in gratitude. But Minos, entranced by the bull's beauty, refused. In revenge, Poseidon twisted Minos's wife's mind, causing her to lust after the beast. This union gave birth to the Minotaur, half man and half bull, a lurking symbol of the consequences when mortals defy divine demands. If Poseidon was moody and could shake the earth itself when enraged, Hades in the underworld was colder, more distant. He rarely rose to meddle in mortal affairs. Indeed, most prayed never to gain his attention at all. Yet sometimes, Hades too was prompted by desire or cunning, as when he seized Persephone. That act tore the heart of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, and resulted in the seasonal dance of life and decay, binding mother and daughter through separation and reunion. Demeter, at first gentle, revealed a hidden ferocity when her love was threatened. Mortals learned that her power extended far beyond abundant crops. When she sulked in grief, the fields turned barren, and famine overshadowed entire kingdoms. Only the pomegranate seed that Persephone consumed in the underworld compelled her to return part of each year, ensuring the cycle of spring's rebirth and winter's dormancy. Among the gods, it was commonly understood that each had realms of authority, yet none were exempt from grudges. Alliances formed and broke. Some immortals aided mortals, only to turn on them when loyalty shifted. In one corner stood Athena's unwavering sense of strategy and justice, while in another, Ares roared for bloodshed. Aphrodite, goddess of love, sowed countless entanglements, delighting as both immortals and mortals succumbed to passion. Caught in the crossfire, mortals learned to respect their rituals and shrines. A fisherman might sacrifice part of his catch to appease Poseidon, or a farmer might pray earnestly to Demeter for gentle rains. And yet, for all the worshipful piety, mortal hearts inevitably became entangled in the disputes of the gods, from jealous Hera to capricious Zeus. Some said mortals gained from these struggles a deeper insight, that divine favor could be won and lost at a whim, that heroes might rise by currying the right deity's blessing, and entire cities might fall if they offended the wrong one. In the end, the pantheon's loves and quarrels shaped human destinies, as though in a cosmic tapestry, each thread woven from the passions of gods and the hopes of humankind. Yet no matter how high they ascended, or how fiercely they fought, the gods themselves were driven by familiar impulses: love, jealousy, pride, vengeance. And so each new dawn found the world trembling on the cusp of miracles or disasters. In that interplay of emotions, 1,000 stories budded, tales of heroes, monsters, and mortals who dared to cross the boundary between divine and earthly realms. Apollo and Artemis were siblings, yet they were as different as sunlight and midnight forests. Their mother, Leto, had gone through great anguish before they came into the world. Because of Hera's jealousy, Leto was chased from land to land, forbidden shelter anywhere in the domain of Zeus. At last, a rocky isle called Delos gave her refuge, and it was here that she bore her twins. The moment they were born, the island was blessed, flowers swaying beneath Apollo's radiant aura, while a hush fell over the groves at Artemis's calm, watchful presence. Apollo emerged gifted with many talents that dazzled even the immortals. As a child, he explored music, discovering a harmony within himself that few could match. With his lyre in hand, he could bring tears to the eyes of gods and men alike or make them dance in joy. In time, his skill at archery rivaled Artemis's own, and he gained further renown through prophecy. Legends say he journeyed to the slopes of Mount Parnassus and slew the dreaded serpent Python, claiming the sacred site of Delphi for himself. There he established an oracle where priestesses, wrapped in divine trance, uttered cryptic truths that shaped the destinies of kings and common folk. Artemis preferred the unspoiled wilderness. Clutching her bow, she roamed moonlit forests, accompanied by a retinue of nymphs. Hers was a fierce independence, and she guarded her chastity with implacable resolve. Tales grew of the countless times she punished those who intruded on her private moments or menaced her companions. One unlucky hunter, Actaeon, accidentally glimpsed her bathing in a secluded glade. In a flash of ire, she turned him into a stag, and his own hounds tore him apart before he could even grasp what had happened. The twins carried a contradictory majesty. Apollo might cast plagues upon mortals if dishonored, yet he could just as swiftly heal them. He was worshipped as a god of light, sparking human creativity, yet he also became feared for the single arrow that could strike an enemy at unimaginable distances. Artemis protected young creatures in the wild but struck down any who forgot nature's sacredness. Together, they formed a balance of illumination and quiet darkness that no other pair of gods could replicate. Their father Zeus, meanwhile, had many other children. None burst into being as peculiarly as Athena, who sprang fully grown from Zeus's brow. Some recounted that Zeus, plagued by a thunderous headache, cried out until Hephaestus swung his hammer at the king's skull to relieve the pressure. Athena emerged in a blaze of metal and light, armed and resolute. The sight of her, regal and wise, filled Olympus with both awe and a touch of unease, for no one had witnessed such a birth before. Unlike the wilder spirits of Olympus, Athena embodied strategy, reason, and the forward march of civilization. It was she who taught humans how to harness the plow, build ships, and govern cities with fairness. Artists invoked her name for inspiration in crafting statues and sculptures. Soldiers called on her to guide them in cunning tactics rather than blind violence. She was not without pride, however. If a mortal claimed expertise surpassing her own, her wrath could be as potent as any Olympian's. A weaver named Arachne once boasted that her tapestries surpassed Athena's in intricacy and beauty. Disguised as an old woman, the goddess visited the mortal loom, quietly inspecting the proud craftswoman. When Arachne refused to heed a warning to be humble, Athena threw off her disguise and challenged her to a contest of skill. Each thread Arachne spun gleamed with color, capturing scenes of gods and heroes. Yet, in her final tapestry, she mocked the failings and amorous scandals of the Olympians. Outraged, Athena tore the loom apart, and Arachne, unable to bear the shame, tried to end her own life. In a last surge of pity or perhaps a colder impulse, Athena transformed her into a spider, condemning her to weave forever in tiny, silken patterns. Athena's sense of justice also led her to the city-state that she would call her own. Legend tells that both she and Poseidon vied to be patron deity of a prosperous coastal settlement. Poseidon struck the land with his trident, summoning a salty spring that roared with the sea's might, but it was undrinkable. Athena, instead, planted the very first olive tree, offering sustenance, shade, and the promise of trade. The people chose her gift over Poseidon's, and so the city of Athens was consecrated in her honor. Even as mortals prospered beneath these gods' blessings, they feared their tempers. In one tale, Niobe, proud queen of Thebes, claimed that her many children made her superior to Leto, who had borne only Apollo and Artemis. With methodical vengeance, the twins struck down Niobe's sons and daughters one by one, leaving the queen to weep so bitterly that she became a stone, tears still streaming down the rock's surface. This merciless punishment showed that even a mortal's fleeting boasts could provoke retribution if the gods chose to heed them. Through such stories, Apollo, Artemis, and Athena became exemplars of excellence. Yet they reminded the world that pride was a double-edged sword. Apollo's musical competitions humbled challengers like Marsyas, whose pipes could not rival the god's lyre. Artemis's arrows ended huntsmen who threatened her realm. Athena's stern lessons were felt by those who forgot that creativity must bow to respect for the divine. Their influence spread across every corner of Greece. Apollo's oracle at Delphi became the pivot of prophecy. Artemis's groves provided sanctuary for beasts and travelers who understood her laws. Athena's city thrived as a beacon of wisdom and invention. In each place, offerings were laid upon altars, hymns were sung, and sacred festivals were celebrated. Gestures of gratitude, awe, and also caution. For mortals knew that beneath the luminous gifts of these deities dwelled a capacity for swift wrath if they were spurned. Their stories, woven into hearthside myths and festival dances, lit a path for human aspiration. Mortals longed for the clarity of Apollo's insight, the purity of Artemis's spirit, the brilliance of Athena's reason. Yet they also realized these ideals were lofty, and any who pursued them had to guard their humility. Thus, in the domain of these three Olympians, both the heights of human possibility and the perils of divine pride remained constant companions. While Olympus stood in the sky, serene and gleaming above the clouds, the earth below often shook under the fury of Ares, god of war. He was not like Athena, who approached conflict with strategy and discipline. Ares thrived in the raw, bloodied chaos of the battlefield. Where he walked, spears shattered and shields splintered. He was the embodiment of conflict unrestrained, of rage let loose. Men and gods alike respected his power but rarely loved him. Even the Olympians, his kin, viewed him with a mixture of awe and disdain. Born of Zeus and Hera, Ares was their son, but he did not inherit their wisdom or political acumen. Instead, he inherited their temper. His presence stirred unease in Olympus. He was often accompanied by a fearsome retinue: Deimos, terror; Phobos, fear; and Eris, strife. Where they rode, war was sure to follow. Mortals who prayed to Ares rarely did so out of devotion. They sought protection, or begged him to turn his gaze elsewhere. His affairs were as turbulent as his nature. Most scandalous of all was his ongoing tryst with Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. She, though married to Hephaestus, found herself drawn to the dark allure of Ares. Their passion was fiery, reckless, and often poorly hidden. It was said that the sun god Helios, ever watchful, once saw them tangled in each other's arms. He reported their affair to Hephaestus, who devised a cunning trap, an invisible net that would ensnare them mid-embrace. When the lovers were caught, Hephaestus summoned the gods to witness their humiliation. Laughter echoed through Olympus, but Ares's pride burned silently, and Aphrodite's beauty remained untouched by shame. Despite his flaws, Ares was not without his moments of strange valor. In the Trojan War, he took sides, first one, then the other, led more by passion than reason. When he fought for the Trojans, his wrath was terrible. But Athena, his rival in all things martial, struck him down without hesitation, proving once more that sheer force could never outmatch cunning and clarity. Ares did not embody noble war or defense of the homeland. He was the scream in a soldier's throat, the reckless charge into danger, the hot surge of hatred when blood is spilled. Cities rarely built grand temples for him. His altars were simple, stained with the red offerings of battle. Yet no soldier doubted his presence when the chaos of war swallowed reason whole. In contrast to Ares's open fury stood Hephaestus, the lame god of the forge. Cast from Olympus as an infant by his own mother, Hera, disgusted by his deformity, Hephaestus tumbled through the sky until he landed in the ocean, where sea nymphs raised him in secret. Time passed, and he grew not into a warrior or a schemer, but a maker. His forge, beneath volcanic mountains, sparked with divine fire. There, he crafted armor for gods and heroes, chains that no force could break, and automatons that moved with eerie grace. Despite his rough beginnings, Hephaestus returned to Olympus, this time not as a castaway but as a master. When Hera found herself imprisoned by a golden throne that Hephaestus had designed, the gods were forced to lure him back with promises of honor and reconciliation. Only Dionysus, with laughter and wine, managed to coax him into forgiving his mother. Upon his return, Hephaestus was given a place among the gods, and a wife, Aphrodite, though she loved another. Hephaestus's hands bore calluses of eternity. He did not care for courtly games or the flattery of mortals. His creations spoke for him. He forged Achilles' armor, unmatched in brilliance. He shaped golden cups for Olympus's feasts. He even built palaces and intricate mechanisms that made Olympus a place of wonder. He was the god of labor and endurance, of beauty born from effort rather than divine favor. His bitterness toward the gods' vanity lingered, though. He saw how easily they turned on each other, how petty their quarrels could become. While others basked in divine glory, Hephaestus kept to his forge, his hammer ringing with silent judgment. In that clanging rhythm he found peace, or at least the closest thing a god like him could know. And then there was Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, madness, and divine ecstasy. He came from outside the core of Olympus, the child of Zeus and the mortal Semele. His birth was unlike any other. When Semele, tricked by Hera, demanded to see Zeus in his full splendor, the god revealed himself, and the sight consumed her in divine fire. Zeus snatched the unborn child from her womb and sewed him into his own thigh. Months later, Dionysus was born again, a god born twice into the world. Dionysus was raised in secret, hidden from Hera's wrath. His upbringing was chaotic, filled with wanderings across distant lands. As he grew, so did his strange allure. Wherever he went, mortals danced, feasted, and lost themselves in wine and ecstasy. But with joy came madness. Those who resisted his rites, who mocked his rituals or denied his divinity, were driven into frenzy or torn apart by their own neighbors. Dionysus's power wasn't only pleasure. It was the breaking of boundaries, the dissolving of order. He arrived at Olympus last, yet none could deny him. Even the gods, proud and ancient, yielded space at their feasting tables for the god who could intoxicate time itself. Mortals both loved and feared him, for he could grant freedom from pain or plunge them into madness without end. His followers, the Maenads, danced barefoot through forests, wielding ivy-wrapped staffs and singing in delirium. In their wake, logic crumbled, and divine ecstasy reigned. Though wild in appearance, Dionysus was no fool. He understood the masks people wore, the pretenses of society. His madness stripped those away. In his rites, a slave might become a god, and a king a trembling fool. He was a god of inversion, of liberation, but never without risk. Together, Ares, Hephaestus, and Dionysus formed a strange triad: violence, craft, and ecstasy. Each, in his own way, touched the mortal world with overwhelming force. War, invention, and abandon, these were not simple gifts. They were trials through which humanity could be shattered or remade. The Olympians, for all their might, mirrored the complexity of those who worshipped them. Their strengths and flaws, their alliances and betrayals, wove the tapestry of myth not with clarity, but with contradictions. And so, the world beneath Olympus continued to tremble with their presence. Not always for the better, but always unforgettable. Far across the Silver Sea, beyond the well-trodden lands of Hellas, there reigned a god unlike the others, Poseidon, Earthshaker, Lord of the Deep. Brother to Zeus and Hades, Poseidon was part of the primal trio that divided the cosmos after the fall of the Titans. Zeus took the skies, Hades the underworld, and to Poseidon fell the vast, restless oceans. He ruled them with a trident carved from the bones of the earth itself, a weapon that could stir tsunamis or bring calm with a flick of his wrist. Poseidon was not merely the god of the sea. He was the sea itself, beautiful, terrifying, unknowable. His moods could change like the tides, calm and generous one moment, then surging with wrath the next. Sailors both feared and adored him. They carved offerings into their ships, whispered prayers before setting out, and cursed his name when storms swallowed their kin. To cross the ocean was to place one's life in Poseidon's hands, and he never promised mercy. He was a god who desired dominion, often quarreling with his fellow Olympians for control of cities and lands. When he contended with Athena for Athens, he struck the ground with his trident and produced a spring of salt water, while she planted an olive tree, useful, nourishing, enduring. The people chose her gift, and Poseidon never forgot the insult. In other places, he won or lost similar battles, leaving behind springs, horses, or earthquakes as markers of his rivalry. Poseidon's passion knew no boundaries. He loved many women, mortal and divine, and fathered countless children, some noble, others monstrous. The mighty Theseus was said to be his son, as was the Cyclops Polyphemus, who dwelled in a distant cave and once encountered a clever Greek named Odysseus. Poseidon's vengeance on Odysseus for blinding his son would stretch for 10 grueling years across endless, cursed waters. His grudges, like his power, were vast and unrelenting. And yet, Poseidon was not entirely savage. Beneath the waves, his palace shimmered with coral and pearl. Sea nymphs danced in his courts, and dolphins leapt beside his chariot. His queen, Amphitrite, once fled his pursuit, terrified of his temper. But in time, he won her back not with force, but persistence, and perhaps a glimmer of genuine affection. Their realm was an empire of silence and currents, of forgotten treasures and deep, uncharted trenches. Though often at odds with Zeus, Poseidon still respected the ancient order of things. When Olympus was threatened, he rose to fight alongside his kin, shaking the earth with each step. In the war against the giants, his trident pierced the ground and split mountains. His fury could drown cities, but when turned against Olympus's enemies, it was a shield as powerful as any thunderbolt. In contrast to Poseidon's roaring presence was Hades, the shadowed ruler of the dead. He dwelled not in the skies or seas but deep beneath the earth, in a realm where no sunlight dared intrude. Hades was the eldest of the brothers, the first to be swallowed by Cronus and the last to emerge. Yet despite his age, he was often forgotten by mortals who feared his name and whispered it only when necessary. Hades did not revel in death, he maintained order. He was the keeper of souls, not their destroyer. His kingdom, the underworld, stretched vast and cold, filled with rivers that bled memory and sorrow. The river Styx bound oaths, the Lethe dissolved remembrance, and the Acheron moaned with eternal regret. Those who died traveled to his gates, guided by Hermes and ferried by Charon, the grim boatman who demanded coin for passage. The underworld was no simple place of torment. It housed Elysium, where the noble and heroic found peace, and the fields of Asphodel, a gray eternity for the ordinary. Only the truly wicked were sent to Tartarus, a pit of endless punishment guarded by monstrous beings and old, forgotten gods. Hades ruled it all with stern impartiality. He did not cheat, but neither did he pardon. Every soul had its place. He ruled with Persephone, his queen, whom he famously abducted from the meadows of the mortal world. Demeter, her mother, wept and raged, and the earth grew barren in her grief. An uneasy compromise was struck. Persephone would spend part of the year above with her mother, bringing spring and harvest, and part below, ushering in winter's sleep. This cycle became the rhythm of life and death, of renewal and decay, a balance forged in divine sorrow. Hades was not as cruel as poets made him out to be. He valued oaths, despised liars, and punished the wicked. But he did not seek love from mortals. He preferred silence and solitude, surrounded by shades and memories. While Zeus threw feasts and Poseidon stirred oceans, Hades listened to the secrets buried in the soil. Every empire, every hero, every god in time would pass beneath his gates. He knew this and waited. Though he rarely emerged from the depths, his influence was felt everywhere. The earth's wealth, gold, gems, fertile soil, all fell under his domain. Some called him Pluton, the giver of riches, to soften his grim image. But wealth and death were siblings, inseparable. Every gift from the ground was a whisper from Hades. Poseidon and Hades, brothers of the storm and the dark, defined the world's edges. One ruled where the sun died each day, and the other where it could never reach. They reminded mortals and gods alike that the cosmos was not all light and laughter. Beneath Olympus's golden halls, there churned a sea that could rise and swallow, and a silence deep enough to outlast time itself. Together with Zeus, they formed the foundation of the world's divine order. But unlike their shining brother, Poseidon and Hades bore no illusions. They were forces, not faces. They did not court admiration, they demanded respect. And whether by wave or grave, they always, eventually, had the final word. High atop the jagged cliffs of Olympus, where thunderclouds wrapped the heavens like cloaks and lightning danced in the breath of gods, reigned Zeus, the king of the gods, the thunderer, the all-father. His name alone stirred awe in mortal hearts and commanded silence among divine peers. But Zeus, for all his power and dominion, was not born to a throne. He wrested it from chaos, defiance, and prophecy. He was the youngest son of Cronus and Rhea, born under the shadow of doom. Cronus, haunted by a prophecy that one of his children would overthrow him, devoured each newborn the moment they drew breath. But Rhea, aching with grief and fury, resolved to break the cycle. When Zeus was born, she wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and offered it to her husband. Cronus swallowed the decoy, while the real child was spirited away to a hidden cave on the island of Crete. There, amidst the wild cries of sacred goats and the clash of divine guardians' shields, Zeus grew in secrecy. He drank the milk of Amalthea, the celestial goat, and learned strength from the nymphs who whispered ancient truths into his ears. As he aged, he watched the skies with a restless gaze, feeling the thunder coil in his blood. The world was unjust, ruled by a tyrant who feared his own children, and Zeus would not endure that fate. When the time came, Zeus emerged from hiding like a storm breaking the horizon. With cunning and courage, he tricked Cronus into vomiting up his swallowed siblings. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, fully grown and burning with vengeance. Together, they waged war against the Titans in a battle that shattered mountains and tore the earth. Thunderbolts clashed with ancient might, and the heavens trembled with each blow. After 10 years of brutal conflict, the Titans fell, cast into Tartarus beneath layers of unbreakable chains. The cosmos was theirs to divide, and Zeus took the sky as his realm, vast, untouchable, full of stars and storms. From his throne on Mount Olympus, he reigned not just with force but with law. He was the arbiter of justice, the upholder of oaths, the protector of hospitality. Yet for all his grandeur, Zeus was no cold figure of authority. He was passion incarnate, fierce, indulgent, and often flawed. His appetite for love was boundless. Mortals and immortals alike drew his gaze, and he pursued them with a fervor that shaped entire myths. Sometimes he came in the form of a swan, a bull, a golden shower, or even the wind itself. From these unions were born heroes and demigods: Perseus, Heracles, Helen, and many more, each bearing a fragment of the divine and a destiny tinged with tragedy. But Zeus's desire was not without consequence. Hera, his queen, burned with jealousy and often turned her wrath on his lovers and their offspring, leaving trails of sorrow and strife in her wake. Despite his flaws, Zeus held the divine order together. He settled disputes among gods, heard the prayers of mortals, and cast judgment from his throne. When oaths were broken, he struck with vengeance. When kings faltered in their duty, he sent omens or storms. His justice was not always gentle, but it was final. Beneath his watch, the balance between chaos and order endured. His symbols were power itself: the thunderbolt, forged by the Cyclopes during the Titanomachy; the eagle, his messenger and avatar; and the oak, a tree whose roots ran deep into the soul of the world. Temples rose across the land in his honor, from the forests of Dodona to the marble columns of Olympia, where athletes competed not just for glory but for Zeus's favor. Even among the gods, Zeus's word was law. His siblings might argue, his children might rebel, but none could deny his place. He had not inherited the sky. He had earned it, forged it in war, and held it with wisdom. Yet he walked a narrow line between tyranny and leadership, passion and restraint. Every choice he made rippled across the realms, altering fates and stirring legends into being. And though he ruled above all, Zeus was not free from fate. Even he, the great thunderer, feared the whispered threads of prophecy. The Moirai, the fates, wove the destinies of gods and mortals alike, and their word was older than Olympus. Zeus could delay, bargain, even deceive, but he could not escape what was written in the stars. In this, he was like all beings, powerful yet not absolute. The story of Zeus is not merely the tale of a god who won a throne. It is the chronicle of a cosmos held together by will and fire, desire and justice. He was a sky full of storms and a voice full of command. Where he walked, the earth bowed. Where he looked, the heavens opened. And even in his silence, there was thunder. Before the earth was ruled by Olympians and before the clash of Titans echoed through the heavens, there stood a figure older than gods, a being whose form was chaos itself, yet whose might shaped the foundation of fear. Typhon. He was no mere monster, no simple beast of rage. He was the storm unchained, the last great challenge to Zeus's dominion, and a terror that even the gods remembered with trembling reverence. Born of Gaia, the Earth Mother, and Tartarus, the bottomless abyss, Typhon was her answer to Zeus's conquest of the Titans. Gaia, enraged by the imprisonment of her children in the underworld, sought to birth a force powerful enough to overturn Olympus itself. From her depths came a colossal figure, taller than mountains, with 100 dragon heads sprouting from his shoulders, each spewing venom and fire, screaming in a cacophony of horrors. His body scraped the stars, and his eyes burned with pure hate. The moment Typhon rose from the depths, the world recoiled. Mountains split, oceans boiled, and winds howled as if in agony. His mere presence disrupted the natural order, and his steps sent tremors across continents. As he approached Olympus, gods fled. Poseidon dove into the sea's deepest trenches. Apollo disappeared into the shadows. Even mighty Ares, the god of war, dared not face him. Only Zeus stood his ground, thunderbolt in hand, the weight of the sky resting on his shoulders. Their battle was cataclysmic, a duel that tore the sky open. Zeus hurled bolt after bolt, each a sunburst of fury. Typhon answered with storms, tornadoes, and rivers of flame. The heavens churned in chaos, the earth cracked open, and stars dimmed as they watched the fate of the cosmos teeter on the edge. For the first time, Zeus faced an enemy that seemed truly invincible, relentless, massive, and driven by a primal rage no law could contain. In their fiercest clash, Typhon caught Zeus off guard. With a roar that turned day to night, he tore the thunderbolt from the Sky King's grasp and shredded his sinews, rendering him helpless. Zeus was dragged across mountains and imprisoned in a cave, his body broken, his voice silenced. For a moment it seemed Olympus had fallen. The world held its breath. But the gods were not idle. Hermes, cunning and swift, devised a rescue. With stealth and cleverness, he restored Zeus's strength and weapons. Revitalized and vengeful, Zeus rose like a hurricane reborn. This time he summoned the full fury of the cosmos. The skies erupted in a blaze of lightning. Mountains melted, rivers reversed. With one final, all-consuming bolt, Zeus struck Typhon with the wrath of a god who would not be dethroned. The great beast fell, his cries shaking the roots of the world. Zeus hurled him beneath Mount Etna, imprisoning him deep within the earth where he remains to this day, writhing in fury. And when Etna rumbles, when fire spills from its mouth, mortals remember. It is Typhon's rage that still burns below. This battle was more than a victory. It was the final cementing of Zeus's rule, a confrontation between untamed chaos and divine order. Typhon was not merely a monster. He was nature's last rebellion, Gaia's final vengeance, the raw scream of the old world refusing to be forgotten. Zeus's triumph was not just physical. It was symbolic. The king of gods had not only defeated an enemy, he had subdued the primal forces that gave birth to gods themselves. Yet, even with Typhon buried, the fear lingered. Myths whispered that one day, the earth might quake hard enough, the fire might burn hot enough, and Typhon might rise again. And so Zeus kept vigil, never fully at rest, knowing that absolute rule must always stand ready to be tested. Through the tale of Typhon, mortals came to understand that even the greatest of kings must face the fury of the past. And for Zeus, it was the memory of that monstrous roar, the storm that once stole his thunder, that would forever echo in the chambers of Olympus. Far from the fury of Typhon's fire and the thunder that echoed over Olympus, a different kind of trial awaited Zeus, one not of brute strength, but of cunning and defiance. The Titans had been cast down, the monsters buried, and the gods had secured their thrones. But it was in the hearts of mortals that the next rebellion would stir. Among them rose a figure as dangerous to Zeus as any beast, Prometheus, the firebringer, the defier of divine decree. Prometheus was not unknown to Zeus. A Titan by birth but no ally to Cronus, Prometheus had once stood beside Zeus in the war against the old gods. It was his foresight, his clever counsel, that helped the Olympians triumph. But even as Olympus celebrated, Prometheus watched with a different vision. He saw not just gods, but the world below, the mortal world, cold, dark, and trembling under the weight of ignorance. Where Zeus sought order, Prometheus sought enlightenment. Where Zeus ruled with hierarchy and fear, Prometheus desired freedom, for mortals to rise, to question, to create. And so he did the unthinkable. From the heavens he stole fire, pure, divine, untouchable, and gave it to mankind. A flicker at first, then a blaze. Civilization was born in that light. No longer would men cower in caves. They would forge, build, speak, dream. Zeus was furious. Not only had a god broken his command, but the very balance of power had shifted. Fire was not just warmth or light. It was knowledge, rebellion, potential. In the hands of mortals, it threatened the very divide between man and God. For Zeus, this was treachery, a challenge to his sovereignty that could not go unanswered. The punishment was as cruel as the crime was bold. Prometheus was bound to a desolate cliff in the Caucasus Mountains, far from the reach of gods or men. Chains forged by Hephaestus himself clamped his limbs to the rock, and each day an eagle, savage and divine, descended to tear into his immortal flesh, devouring his liver, only for it to regenerate by nightfall. An endless torment, crafted not just to punish, but to warn. Yet even in agony, Prometheus did not beg. He did not cry out to Zeus, nor repent. Instead, he laughed weakly, defiantly, for he held a secret, one Zeus desperately feared. Prophecy, a truth yet to unfold, that one day, a son born of Zeus would be the instrument of his downfall. It was this knowledge that gave Prometheus power even in chains. The future itself had become his weapon. Zeus, unnerved, sought answers. He sent Hermes, demanding that Prometheus reveal the identity of this child. But the Titan, bloodied and broken, remained silent. His suffering became legend, his defiance a symbol of rebellion. To mortals, he was no longer just a firebringer. He was a martyr, a god who chose their cause over Olympus. Over time, Prometheus's suffering stirred even the hearts of gods. Some whispered of injustice. Others feared the prophecy. It was not brute force that would free him, but destiny. And the arrival of a hero, yet unborn, who would climb the mountain, break the chains, and bring with him a new age. But Zeus watched the world below with a wary gaze. He tightened his grip on Olympus, yet somewhere deep within him, a flicker of doubt burned. Prometheus had not just stolen fire. He had lit a flame of resistance, of thought, of independence. Could not be unlit. And so, the Sky King ruled on, but now with the shadow of prophecy at his back and the echo of Prometheus's laughter carried by the wind. In that defiance lay the seeds of change, and though chained, the Titan had already won something Zeus could not undo. He had given mankind a reason to look up at the gods not with fear, but with fire in their eyes. As the winds howled over the cliffs of the Caucasus and the chained Prometheus endured his eternal torment, Zeus turned his eyes once more to the earth below. His grip had tightened after the theft of fire, his edicts sharpened by paranoia and prophecy. Yet the world did not grow quieter. The gift of fire had sparked more than civilization. It had awakened ambition, questioning, and the unyielding march of progress. The gods, once distant and revered, now found themselves the subject of mortal myth and mortal scrutiny. And Zeus, for all his power, felt the weight of that shifting tide. In his divine mind, one solution rose above all: control through legacy. If fire had been a gift from a rebellious god, then Zeus would offer something of his own making, something beautiful, perfect, and binding, a being crafted not to challenge, but to obey. Thus, from the minds of the Olympians and the hands of Hephaestus, Pandora was born. She was shaped from the finest clay, sculpted with divine precision, and adorned with gifts from every god: beauty, charm, eloquence, curiosity, and grace. But beneath this elegance lay Zeus's true intention, a silent weapon, one that would balance Prometheus's defiance with divine retribution. She was sent to Prometheus, the brother of Prometheus, foolish, impulsive, and easily swayed by beauty. Despite his brother's warnings never to accept a gift from Zeus, Prometheus welcomed Pandora without hesitation. With her came a sealed jar, mysterious and forbidden, said to contain blessings from Olympus. Yet no one knew its true contents. The gods had each placed within it not blessings, but all the evils of the world: sorrow, disease, jealousy, hunger, and despair. A divine trap wrapped in elegance. Pandora, driven by the very curiosity gifted to her by Hermes, eventually unsealed the jar. In an instant the world changed. Shadows flew forth, silent at first, then screaming, scattering across the earth, slipping into mortal lives, coiling around hearts and minds. Where once men had struggled against nature, now they struggled against themselves. The golden age of humanity was over. Pain had entered the world, and with it the complexity of existence. And yet, as the last remnants fled the jar, one thing remained: a whisper, a shimmer, a single flicker of light: hope. It clung to the edge of the jar, fragile but unyielding. Whether it was Zeus's oversight or his cruel irony remains debated even among the gods. But there it was, trapped inside as all else fled. Hope, the final gift or the final curse. Pandora wept, not out of guilt, but because she understood what had been unleashed. Mortals, once pure and ascending, now had burdens. They knew loss, they feared death, they tasted betrayal. Yet, through it all, they still clung to that one final light. The jar remained sealed again, but the world had changed. The gods looked on, knowing they had created something irreversible. Zeus watched all of this from Olympus with a quiet satisfaction. Prometheus had given fire, but he had given struggle. He had restored the balance. Mankind would never be gods, not truly. They would now crawl through sorrow, search for joy, and stumble through suffering. But even as Zeus reveled in this divine manipulation, a subtle unease tugged at him. Hope was still out there, flickering. Mortals had fire and now hope. They had tools and they had dreams. The gods debated amongst themselves. Had Pandora been a punishment or a prophecy? Was humanity now cursed, or had they been made truly alive for the first time? What none could deny was this: they had changed. Mortals would no longer be mere subjects of fate. They would become its challengers. And in that challenge, Zeus sensed a new storm brewing. Pandora lived on among mortals, a symbol of both origin and burden. Her name became etched into memory not just as the bringer of sorrow, but as the mother of resilience. She had opened the jar, yes, but she had also borne witness to humanity's first confrontation with its own darkness. From his throne, Zeus remained ever watchful. Prometheus had been silenced, but his legacy endured. Fire had lit the minds of men. Now sorrow had shaped their hearts. And through it all, a single ember glowed in the gloom. Hope, ever defiant, ever dangerous. It was the one thing Zeus could never fully control. The winds over Mount Othrys blew wild that night, curling around the jagged remnants of what was once the throne of the Titans. Dust carried the scent of old blood and ancient betrayal, as though the mountain itself remembered the wars that had shaped its fate. Hyperion stood alone at the summit, his golden armor dulled by centuries of slumber, his face shadowed beneath a helm that no longer gleamed. He did not move as lightning split the sky behind him, nor when the echoes of long-dead cries stirred in the hollows of the cliffs. He had awakened not to reclaim a crown, but to seek a truth buried deeper than any vault in Tartarus. Below, the earth trembled slightly, not from the footsteps of gods, but from the movement of something older and colder. A pulse ran beneath the surface of the world, as if Gaia herself were groaning in her sleep. Hyperion could feel it in his bones. Not prophecy, not vision, just a weight pressing into the soul, like the hush before a storm breaks. In the silence, he remembered Prometheus's words, "Not all chains are made of iron. Some are made of time." Elsewhere, in the shifting sands of Egypt, Prometheus sat across from a man who claimed no name but had eyes that held the same pain as the Titans. They shared a fire, its light flickering across broken statues buried in the desert like forgotten gods. "They rise now," the man said, voice cracked like papyrus left too long in the sun. "Not to rule, but to remind." Prometheus didn't answer. He was thinking of Pandora, what she had become and what she had unleashed. In the forests of the north, Artemis paused mid-step, her silver bow lowered as an unfamiliar howl rose in the distance. Not animal, not monster, something in between. She turned her head slightly, catching the scent of rot and divine ichor. Whatever lingered in the trees was not born of Olympus. Her hunter's instincts prickled as the mists thickened, wrapping the forest in a damp shroud. She whispered a warning to the wind, not knowing if anyone left would hear. Hephaestus, deep within the roots of his forge beneath the Aegean, hammered not swords but keys, each forged from a memory, a secret, a betrayal. He knew what was coming. The locks he'd once placed to keep the worst of existence sealed were failing. Each key he forged was not to open a door, but to prepare for what would walk through once it burst open anyway. Sweat dripped from his brow, mixing with soot and tears he didn't realize he still had to shed. Above all, Hera stood at the edge of the world, looking out across an ocean that no longer obeyed Poseidon's call. The sea god had vanished days ago, and in his absence, the waters surged as if wild and angry. She wore no crown now, only a cloak of mourning and resolve. "This is what you wanted," she whispered, not in accusation, but in weary understanding. She no longer sought to control fate. Now she braced to survive it. Hermes darted between realms, his sandals worn thin, his face gaunt. No longer the jovial trickster, he moved with the urgency of a messenger who knew his words could no longer delay destiny. Every door he opened led to more shadows, more silence. He began to wonder if even the gods could still hear prayers, or if the voices crying out were only their own, echoing back through empty temples. Atlas, long resigned to his burden, now felt it shift. Not heavier, but curious. The weight of the heavens felt alive, like it breathed. He listened, not with ears but with the marrow of his bones. Something stirred in the cosmos, something ancient even to him. The stars no longer whispered of fate. They sang of a reckoning. And as they did, he wept, not from pain, but from the terrible beauty of it all. Pandora moved like a ghost through the realms, not seeking answers but watching reactions. She saw mortals worship fire again, not as warmth or tool, but as chaos incarnate. She watched them burn their own cities in search of clarity, mistaking destruction for enlightenment. She didn't hate them, she pitied them, but in her pity grew a coldness that frightened even her. She was not the bringer of doom, they were. The fates themselves had gone silent, their loom tangled beyond repair. Clotho could no longer spin, Lachesis could no longer measure, and Atropos had lost her shears. The threads bled together, mortal and divine, beginning and end. They sat in quiet horror, watching the tapestry unravel in their hands. Perhaps, whispered Lachesis, this is what comes when we forget that even gods must be accountable. Ares stood atop a battlefield where no war had yet begun. The ground was soaked not with blood, but anticipation. He smiled bitterly, feeling alive in a way he hadn't in centuries. But it wasn't joy, it was inevitability. Let them come, he muttered. Let them all come. He was no longer the god of victory. He was the echo of violence, and echoes always return. Somewhere between realms, Hades sat beside a dried riverbed. The Styx no longer flowed, and the dead no longer whispered. He stared into the emptiness, wondering if even death had chosen to flee. Persephone, silent beside him, placed a flower in the dust. It didn't bloom, crumbled. She didn't cry. She simply stood, brushed the dirt from her hands, and walked toward the dark. In that moment, the sky over the world cracked. Not from lightning, but from sound. A single, long note that echoed through every soul, divine and mortal alike. A tone not meant to be heard, but felt. It wasn't a call. It was a signal. The kind that doesn't ask for permission, only announces a presence. The kind of sound that marks the return of something forgotten. And in the ruins of a forgotten temple, a child awoke. Eyes like stars, skin like shadow. The child did not cry. He simply looked up, and the ground beneath him began to pulse. Not from fear, not from pain, but from potential. The kind that burns. The skies, once fractured and turbulent, now held a stillness more unsettling than chaos. A silence had descended across realms, not of peace, but of suspension. Like the world itself had paused to inhale, waiting for the outcome of a question it was too afraid to ask. No trumpet sounded, no thunder cracked. Only the soft, steady thrum of the earth's heartbeat, pulsing beneath mountains, oceans, and temples alike. At the center of this stillness stood the child, neither fully mortal nor wholly divine. His eyes, which once mirrored the stars, now reflected only those who looked into them. He was possibility given form, a vessel not of prophecy but consequence. Around him, time bent ever so slightly, as though fate itself leaned in to listen. He did not speak. He did not need to. Every step he took left echoes in places untouched by light for millennia. Prometheus watched from a ridge overlooking the valley. He had seen empires rise and gods fall, but never had he felt the weight of uncertainty like this. This was not the return of the old world, nor the ascension of a new one. It was the folding of all stories into a single, burning thread. He is not a weapon, he murmured to himself, almost pleading. He is the mirror. From the shattered ruins of Olympus, Hera walked alone through broken columns and overgrown marble. Her hands brushed against the remnants of her former glory, not out of longing, but as if offering farewell. The world had changed beyond what the gods could contain, and perhaps that was as it should be. We were meant to guide, not to chain, she whispered, remembering the arrogance they had once called order. We forgot the difference. Zeus's throne, untouched even in ruin, now bore no crown, no sigil, only dust. The old king was gone, not slain, not exiled, but eroded. What he had built could no longer hold the weight of what he tried to control. Lightning no longer answered to his hand. The storms had found a new rhythm, one written by winds that no longer cared for names. Ares stood beneath a red sky, his armor cracked, his blade buried in the dirt. There were no more battles left in him, not for dominion, not even for survival. For the first time in all his endless centuries, he understood that war was not strength. It was a refusal to listen. He knelt, not in surrender, but in understanding. And in doing so, the ground beneath him healed a little. Hades, seated by the banks of the now silent Styx, closed his eyes and finally rested. Death, it seemed, had found a new keeper, or perhaps none at all. Persephone stood guard beside him, not as queen, not as bride, but as balance. She reached out, letting a single seed fall into the barren soil. And for the first time in ages, something green pushed upward, fragile but defiant. The child continued walking, not forward, not toward, simply through. Through memories, through myths, through the crumbling constructs of gods and men. Where he passed, temples wept, forests breathed deeper, and forgotten creatures stirred. He was not savior or destroyer. He was the final page of an old book and the blank page of a new one. And every soul, mortal or divine, felt the pull of ink upon it. Pandora found him beneath a tree older than language, its leaves shimmering with knowledge lost to time. She looked at him and did not smile. "Are you hope?" she asked, her voice quieter than wind. He looked up, and in his eyes, she saw both the box and everything that had ever crawled out of it. "No," he said at last. "I am the lesson you left behind." And so the world did not end. It unfolded. The Titans faded, not into oblivion, but into memory, their names no longer cursed but contemplated. The Olympians stepped down, not in disgrace, but in reflection, some seeking solitude, others rebirth. The fates cut their final thread, only to find it reweaving itself, not in their hands, but in the hearts of the living. Mortals looked to the stars again, not for answers, but for questions worth asking. They sang stories not of gods who punished, but of powers that reminded. They built fires not just to warm their homes, but to tell tales around. The divine had not vanished. It had changed shape, scattered like stardust into dreams, into doubts, into the quiet courage of waking up every day. In time, the child grew not in size but in presence. He became myth, then legend, then whisper. Some said he vanished. Others claimed he became the wind. But one thing was certain: the world no longer belonged to the gods. It belonged to those who dared to remember and still chose to love. Those who knew that even ruin could be sacred, that even endings could be beginnings. And somewhere, in the space between dusk and dawn, a voice long thought forgotten spoke once more. "Now begin." The winds whispered names no longer spoken, carrying them across oceans and through silent mountain passes. In the deepest corners of the world, beneath ancient stone, in the curl of a child's laugh, in the pause before a storm, echoes still lingered. Echoes not of war cries or divine commands, but of choices made in silence, in pain, in love. A village child, somewhere far from the heart of old empires, sat beneath a tree, tracing symbols in the dirt with a stick. He did not know their meaning, nor had anyone taught him. But still he drew, and with every curve of the line, something stirred. An old memory, perhaps, or a seed from another time. In a distant monastery untouched by war, a monk lit a candle as the sun rose. She paused, her hand hovering over a forgotten scroll. Its ink faded but intact. She did not read it. She simply bowed her head and listened, for she could feel something breathing in the silence between the words. Far out at sea, on a ship with no destination, an old man looked to the horizon. Around his neck hung a fragment of something once mighty, a shard of armor, a bit of broken crown, no one could say. He often told stories to the waves, and though he never got answers, he believed the sea listened. The child, the one who walked through gods and myths and flame, was never seen again. or so they said. But sometimes, on stormless nights when the sky blazed with unfamiliar constellations, some swore they saw a figure standing at the edge of the forest or a face in the firelight that didn't quite belong to this world. The Titans sleep now, their anger spent, their echoes fading into rhythm with the earth. The gods who once ruled now walk in humility, or have vanished into tales told around village fires. Power is no longer taken, it is given, earned, shared. And the world, it breathes differently now. Some will forget, most will. That is the way of mortals. But every so often, a dream will come, a strange dream, of towers that breathe, rivers that sing, and a child who walked without fear through the ruins of Olympus. A dream that leaves you waking with the sense that something vast has shifted, and you were part of it. You always were. And as long as one person remembers, not the names, not the battles, but the feeling, then the story continues. Not in temples or scrolls, but in kindness shown in anger's place, in forgiveness when none is deserved, in choosing to love even after loss. Because in the end, it was never about the gods. It was about us.